The morning light filtered through the cracked window of Victoria Sterling's tiny apartment, casting shadows across the stack of medical bills that seemed to grow taller each day. She sat at her kitchen table, her fingers trembling as she counted the numbers again, hoping somehow they would magically change. $37,000. That was what stood between her father and the life-saving heart surgery he desperately needed. Victoria pushed her long auburn hair behind her ears and glanced at the framed photo on the table. Her father, Robert Sterling, smiled back at her from happier times when he was still performing jazz music in small clubs around the city. Before the heart disease, before the mounting medical expenses, before their world turned upside down. The sound of her phone buzzing broke the silence. It was another call from the hospital's billing department. Victoria let it go to voicemail, knowing she had no good news to share. She grabbed her worn leather jacket and headed out into the bustling streets of downtown, making her way to her morning job at Meridian Gallery Cafe. The Gallery Cafe was nestled in the heart of the financial district, where art met commerce in an elegant dance of culture and wealth. Victoria had been working there for 8 months, serving coffee too. Art collectors and business executives who spent more on a single painting than she made in a year. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was surrounded by million-dollar artwork while she couldn't afford to save her
father's life.
As she tied her apron and prepared for the morning rush, Victoria tried to push away the desperate thoughts that had been haunting her lately. There had to be another way. There always was. She just hadn't found it yet. The bell above the door chimed, and Victoria looked up to see him walk in. Damien Cross. She recognized him immediately. It's not just because he was one of their regular customers, but because his presence seemed to command the entire room. Tall and imposing, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes, he moved through the world like someone who had never been told no. Damien Cross was a tech billionaire, the kind of man who appeared on magazine covers and made headlines with his business acquisitions. He came to the Gallery Cafe 3 times a week, always ordering the same thing, a double espresso, no sugar. In all the months Victoria had served him, he had never once acknowledged her as anything more than a service provider. Today felt different. As Victoria prepared his usual order, she felt his eyes on her, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed briefly, and she noticed how he seemed to really see her for the first time. "You look tired," Damien said, his voice deep and measured. It was the first personal comment he had ever made to her. Victoria forced a smile. "Long night. But your espresso is ready, Mr. Cross." But instead of taking the cup and leaving as he always did, Damien remained at the counter. "How long have you been working here?" 8 months, Victoria replied, unsure why he was suddenly interested in conversation. "And you work other jobs too." It wasn't a question. Somehow, he had noticed. Victoria's cheeks flushed. "Is there anything else I can get you?" Damien studied her face, taking in the dark circles under her green eyes, the way she held herself with quiet dignity despite obvious exhaustion. "Actually, yes, have dinner with me tonight." The request hit Victoria like a physical blow. She stared at him, searching for any sign that he was joking. "I don't date customers, Mr. Cross." A slow smile spread across Damien's lips. "Everything has a price, Victoria. It's just a matter of finding the right number." The casual cruelty of his words made Victoria's stomach turn. This was what she was to him, to all of them. Commodity. Something to be bought and sold. "My answer is no." Damien reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black business card. On one side was his name and contact information. On the other, written in elegant script, were 5 words that would haunt Victoria for the rest of the day. $1 million. One night. Victoria's hands shook as she stared at the card. $1 million. More than enough to pay for her father's surgery and everything else they needed. But the price he was asking her to pay felt like it would cost her soul. "You look like someone who could use the money," Damien said quietly, his voice almost gentle now. "Think about it." Before Victoria could respond, he placed a $100 bill on the counter for a $5 coffee and walked away, leaving her standing there with the business card burning in her hand. The rest of Victoria's shift passed in a blur. She served customers, cleaned tables, and smiled when expected, but her mind was trapped in a prison of impossible choices. That evening, she sat beside her father's hospital bed, watching the monitors that tracked his weakening heart. Robert Sterling looked smaller than she remembered, his face pale against the white pillows. Psst. The doctors had been clear. Without the surgery, he had maybe 6 months to live. With it, he could have years. Good years. Years where he might play music again, laugh again, be the father she remembered from her childhood. "You look worried, sweetheart," Robert said, his voice weak, but warm. "More worried than usual, I mean." Victoria forced a smile. "Just thinking about work stuff, Dad. Nothing important." "Everything about you is important to me," Robert replied, reaching for her hand. "I hope you know that. Whatever happens to me, I need you to promise me something." "Dad, don't talk like that. Promise me you'll live your life. Don't sacrifice your happiness for an old man who's had his time." Victoria squeezed his hand, tears threatening to spill over. If only he knew what kind of sacrifice she was considering. That night, alone in her apartment, Victoria sat on her bed and stared at Damien's business card. Nina, her roommate and best friend, had gone to visit her family for the weekend, leaving Victoria alone with her thoughts. She thought about her father, about the dream she had given up to take care of him, about the crushing weight of debt. That seemed to grow heavier each day. She thought about Damien Cross and his cold proposition. The way he had looked at her like she was something he could simply purchase. But she also thought about the number. $1 million. Money. Money that could save her father and give them both a future. Victoria's hands trembled as she picked up her phone. She dialed the number on the card before she could lose her nerve. It rang twice before Damien's voice filled the silence. "I was wondering when you'd call." "I hate you," Victoria whispered, the words barely audible. "That's acceptable," Damien replied calmly. "I only need your answer." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a cliff. "Tomorrow night, send me the address." "Already done. Check your phone." The message was waiting when she hung up. An address for the Grandview Hotel, the most expensive hotel in the city, tomorrow at 9 o'clock. As Victoria sat in the darkness of her apartment, she tried to convince herself that this was just business. One night, one terrible night, and then her father would live. She would have paid the price for his life with her own dignity, but some prices were worth paying. What Victoria didn't know was that Damien Cross was sitting in his penthouse across the city, staring out at the glittering lights and wondering why the thought of tomorrow night didn't bring him the satisfaction it should. For the first time in his life, getting what he wanted felt like losing something he couldn't name. The next evening arrived faster than Victoria had expected. She stood in front of her mirror wearing the only dress she owned that could pass for elegant, a simple, black number she had bought for job interviews. Her reflection looked back at her with eyes that held no recognition. She didn't know the woman staring back at her. The Grandview Hotel rose into the night sky like a monument to wealth and power. Victoria's hands shook as she gave her name. At the front desk, and the concierge directed her to the penthouse elevator. The ride up felt endless, each floor marking another step away from the person she used to be. When the doors opened, Damien was waiting for her in a room that screamed luxury. Floor 2 ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city. Everything from the furniture to the artwork spoke of money beyond imagination. "It came," Damien said, and for the first time since she had known him, he seemed almost surprised. "Let's just get this over with," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. Damien walked to a nearby table and opened an elegant briefcase. Inside was a contract, simple and straightforward. One night. $1 million. No complications. "Last chance to change your mind," Damien said, offering her a pen. Victoria thought of her father, of the monitors tracking his failing heart, of the bills that would never stop coming. She took the pen and signed her name, sealing a bargain that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. What happened next would haunt them both, not because it was terrible, but because it was beautiful in a way that neither had expected. In seeking to buy one night, Damien Cross had unknowingly purchased something far more dangerous: the possibility of real love. The contract lay signed on the mahogany table, but neither Victoria nor Damien moved toward it. The silence in the penthouse suite stretched between them like an invisible wall, filled with tension and unspoken emotions. Victoria stood by the massive windows, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights below. "This doesn't have to be what you think it is," Damien said quietly, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but didn't drink it, his hands betraying a nervousness that seemed foreign to his usual confident demeanor. Victoria turned to face him, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and pain. "What else could it be? You paid for me like I'm some kind of object. That's exactly what this is." "I know how it looks," Damien began, but Victoria cut him off. Do you really understand what you've done to me?" Her voice cracked, and she wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold the pieces together. "I've never done anything like this before. I've never even been with anyone before." The admission hung in the air between them and Damien. Felt something shift inside his chest. He set down his glass and took a step toward her, then stopped when he saw her flinch. "Victoria, I didn't know. Would it have mattered?" she asked, tears threatening to spill over. "Would anything about me have mattered to you if I didn't need the money so desperately?" Damien opened his mouth to give his usual response, something cold and calculated about business being business. But the words wouldn't come. Looking at Victoria now, seeing the way the moonlight caught the tears in her eyes, seeing the quiet dignity she maintained even in this impossible situation, he realized that everything about her mattered to him in ways he couldn't understand. "Sit with me," he said, gesturing to the leather sofa by the fireplace. "Please, just talk to me." Victoria hesitated, then slowly made her way to the sofa, sitting as far from him as possible. "What do you want to talk about?" "The weather. Your stock portfolio? How many other women you've bought?" "Tell me about your father," Damien said instead. The request caught Victoria off guard. "What? Your father? You're doing this for him, aren't you? Tell me about him." Victoria stared at Damien, searching his face for some sign of mockery or manipulation. But his blue eyes held only genuine interest, and something that might have been compassion. "He's a musician," Victoria said slowly. "Was a musician. Jazz piano. He used to play at this little club downtown called Moonlight Blue. Nothing fancy, but he loved it. He said music was the only language that never lied." As Victoria spoke about her father, her voice grew warmer, and some of the tension left her shoulders. She told Damien about growing up in their small apartment above the music store, falling asleep to the sound of her father practicing scales, learning to appreciate art and beauty even when money was tight. "He sounds like a good man," Damien said when she finished. "He is the best man I know." Victoria wiped at her eyes. "That's why I'm here. That's why I signed your contract. Because good men shouldn't die just because they can't afford to live." Damien felt something crack inside his chest. He had grown up in a world where everything was transactional, where love was weakness and vulnerability was dangerous. But sitting here listening to Victoria talk about her father, he realized he had never heard anyone speak with such pure, selfless love. "What about you?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Do you have family?" Damien's jaw tightened. "No, not really. Not really. My parents died when I was 16. Car accident. I was raised by my uncle after that, but he was more interested in my trust fund than my well-being. I learned early that people always want something from you, and money is usually the safest thing to give them." Victoria studied his face, seeing for the first time the loneliness that lurked behind his confident facade. "Is that why you made me that offer? Because you think everything can be bought?" "I thought it could be," Damien admitted. "Thought you could be. But sitting here now, talking to you, I realize I was wrong about everything." Before Victoria could respond, Damien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. "I'm sorry, I need to take this. It's urgent." Victoria watched as Damien stepped onto the balcony to take his call. Through the glass doors, she could see him pacing, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. When he returned, His face was a mask of controlled fury. "What's wrong?" Victoria asked. "Nothing that concerns you," Damien said, but his voice was tight with anger. What Victoria didn't know was that the call had been from James Morrison, Damien's business rival and former friend. James had called to gloat about a rumor spreading through their social circle about Damien's latest acquisition. The conversation had revealed something that made Damien's blood run cold. The bet 3 months ago at a private poker game? James had wagered that no woman was truly unattainable if the price was high enough.
Ow.
Damien had disagreed, insisting that some people had principles that couldn't be bought. The argument had escalated until James bet him $5 million that he couldn't seduce any woman of James's choosing within 6 months. Victoria Sterling had been James's choice. Damien had forgotten about the stupid bet until tonight, but James's call had brought it all flooding back. What had started as a drunken argument between rivals had somehow twisted into this moment. This woman, this terrible realization that he had become the very thing he despised. "Damien." Victoria's voice brought him back to the present. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He looked at her, really looked at her, and felt his heart break for the first time in his adult life. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. She was brave and selfless and pure in a way that made him feel dirty just for being in the same room. "Victoria," he began, but she interrupted him. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I know this is awkward for both of us. We don't have to pretend this is something it's not." But that was the problem. For Damien, it had become something else entirely. Somewhere between her tears and her stories about her father, between her quiet dignity and her fierce love, he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with her. The realization terrified him. "I can't do this," Damien said suddenly, standing up and walking to the window. Victoria felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean? I can't go through with this." "Any of it." He turned to face her, his eyes wild with an emotion she couldn't name. "Take the money, all of it, but go home, please." "I don't understand." "You don't have to understand. Just take the money and leave." Victoria stood up, her face flushing with humiliation. "So that's it? You've decided I'm not worth your time after all?" "No," Damien said desperately. "That's not it at all. You're worth everything. That's the problem." Before Victoria could ask what he meant, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and felt her world tilt. It was the hospital. "I have to take this," she whispered, her hands shaking as she answered. "Hello?"
Oh.
"Miss Sterling? This is Dr. Helena Ward. I'm calling about your father." Victoria's legs gave out, and she sank onto the sofa. "What's wrong? Is he okay?" "He's stable, but there's been a complication. We need to move up the surgery. If we can get approval for the procedure by tomorrow morning, we can fit him into the schedule. Otherwise, we'll have to wait another month, and I'm not sure he has that long." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the world crushing down on her. "How much time do I have to get the money?" "The payment needs to be processed by 8 a.m. tomorrow." "I understand. Thank you, doctor." Victoria hung up and looked at Damien, who had been listening to every word. Fresh tears streamed down her face, and she no longer cared about dignity or pride or anything except the man lying in that hospital bed. "I have to go," she said, standing up on unsteady legs. "I have to try to find another way." "Victoria." Wait, but she was already moving toward the door, her vision blurred by tears and desperation. She had made it halfway across the room when Damien's voice stopped her. "The money is already yours." Victoria turned around slowly. "What?" "I had the transfer initiated the moment you signed the contract. The money is in your account." "What?" "Your father can have his surgery." Victoria stared at him, unable to process what he was saying. "But I'm leaving. We didn't do anything." "It doesn't matter." "Of course it matters." That was the deal. Damien walked toward her slowly, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Some things are more important than deals, Victoria. Some people are more important than money." For a moment, they stood facing each other in the soft glow of the city lights, and Victoria saw something in Damien's eyes that took her breath away. It wasn't lust or ownership or the cold calculation she had expected. It was love. Pure, desperate, Hopeless love. Why? She whispered. Because I love you, Damien said simply. I know that's impossible. I know I have no right to feel that way about you after what I've done, but I do. I love you, and I can't bear the thought of your father dying because of my selfishness. Victoria felt her heart break and mend and break again, all in the same moment. This wasn't how the story was supposed to go. The cold billionaire wasn't supposed to fall in love. The desperate woman wasn't supposed to see past the money to the lonely man underneath. But as she looked at Damien Cross, really looked at him, she saw something that changed everything. She saw herself reflected in his eyes, not as an object to be purchased, but as someone precious and irreplaceable. I don't know what to say. Victoria whispered, say you'll let me help you. Say you'll give me a chance to be better than the man I was when I walked into that cafe. Victoria wanted to say yes. Despite everything, despite the circumstances that had brought them together, she could feel herself falling for this broken, complex man who had just given her everything and asked for nothing in return. But before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. The sender was unknown, but the content made her blood run cold. Ask your billionaire boyfriend about the bet. Ask him why James Morrison chose you specifically. Some things are more expensive than $1 million, sweetheart. Like your pride. Victoria's hand shook as she read the message again. Then she looked up at Damien, and he saw the exact moment her heart closed to him. There's a bet, isn't there? She said quietly. This is all some kind of game between you and your rich friends? Damien's face went white. Victoria, I can explain. Explain what? That I was never a person to you? Just a pawn in some twisted competition? Victoria laughed, and it was the most heartbreaking sound Damien had ever heard. God, I'm so stupid. For a minute there, I actually believed you. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, Victoria said, her voice growing stronger with anger. Tell me about this bet. Tell me why James Morrison knows my name. Damien opened his mouth, then closed it. How could he explain that what had started as a meaningless wager had become the most important thing in his life? How could he make her understand that falling in love with her had been the most real thing that had ever happened to him? Victoria took his silence as confirmation of her worst fears. She walked to the table, picked up the signed contract, and tore it in half. Keep your money, she said, her voice deadly calm. All of it. I'd rather watch my father die than owe you a single cent. Victoria, please. She was already walking toward the elevator. Damien followed her, desperate to explain, to fix this, to somehow undo the damage. But the elevator doors closed between them, and Victoria Sterling disappeared from his life as suddenly as she had entered it. The last thing Damien saw was her reflection in the polished steel doors, and the look of absolute betrayal in her green eyes would haunt him for the rest of his days. 3 weeks had passed since Victoria Sterling walked out of Damien Cross's life, and the silence felt like death. Damien sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Cross Technologies, staring out at the city below without really seeing it. His assistant Alina had knocked 3 times in the past hour, but he hadn't responded. Board meetings went unattended. Deals worth millions sat unsigned on his desk. None of it mattered anymore. The newspapers had been calling it the business story of the year. Tech billionaire Damien Cross cuts ties with Morrison Industries. What they didn't know was that destroying James Morrison's partnership had been the easy part. Watching Victoria disappear into the night, taking his heart with her, had been the hard part. Alina finally entered without permission, setting a cup of coffee on his desk and sitting down across from him. He was the only person in his employ, brave enough to treat him like a human being instead of a walking bank account. You look terrible, she said bluntly. Thank you for that astute observation, Damien replied without turning from the window. When was the last time you ate something? I'm not hungry. When was the last time you went home? This is home, Lena sighed and pulled out her tablet. The Morrison termination is final. His assets are frozen, his reputation is ruined, and his investors are fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. You've effectively destroyed him. Feel better? No. Good. Because revenge is supposed to taste bitter when it's the wrong revenge. Alina leaned forward. Tell me about her. Damien finally turned from the window. There's nothing to tell. There's everything to tell. In 15 years of working for you, I've never seen you like this. You're in love." The words hung in the air between them. Damien had never said it out loud, not even to himself. But hearing Alina say it made it real in a way that terrified him. "She hates me," he said quietly. "Maybe. But do you love her?" "Yes." "Then fix it." "It's not that simple, Alina. You don't understand what I did to her. So make me understand." Damien told her everything. The bet, the contract, the night that had changed his life. And the terrible moment when Victoria realized she had been nothing more than a pawn in a game between wealthy men. When he finished, Alina was quiet for a long time. "You're right," she said finally. "You are a terrible person. Thank you. Very helpful." "Nothing but," Alina continued. "Terrible people can become better people if they're willing to do the work. The question is, are you?" Before Damien could answer, his phone rang. It was Dr. Helena Ward from Mercy General Hospital. Damien's heart stopped as he remembered Victoria's father. "Mr. Cross, I'm calling because I have some questions about the anonymous donation that came through last night." "What donation?" "Someone donated enough money to cover Robert Sterling's surgery and set up a fund for other patients in similar situations. The payment came from an account linked to your company's, but there's no paperwork, no publicity, nothing. We just want to make sure it's legitimate." Damien looked at Alina, who was smiling knowingly. "Alina, what did you do?" "What you should have done 3 weeks ago," she replied. "I may have taken some liberties with your signature in your bank account. Consider it a performance bonus." "Dr. Ward," Damien said into the phone, "the donation is legitimate. Please, proceed with Mr. Sterling's surgery." "Thank you, Mr. Kraus. I'll make sure the family knows." "No," Damien said quickly. "Keep it anonymous. Completely anonymous." After he hung up, Damien stared at Alina in amazement. "You gave away $2 million without asking me." "Actually, it was $3 million. The fund needed to be substantial enough to help other families too. And you're welcome. She'll never know it came from me." "That's the point," Alina said, standing up. "This isn't about you getting credit or winning her back. This is about you learning to do the right thing because it's right, not because you want something in return." That afternoon, Damien found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He drove to Mercy General Hospital and sat in the waiting room like any other visitor. He didn't announce himself or ask for special treatment. He just sat and waited, hoping to catch a glimpse of Victoria or news about her father's surgery. Hours passed. Families came and went, while doctors delivered news, both good and terrible. And finally, Dr. Ward emerged from the surgical wing, still in her scrubs, looking tired but satisfied. "Mr. Sterling's surgery was a complete success," she announced to Victoria, who was pacing nearby. "The new valve is functioning perfectly, and his prognosis is excellent." Victoria collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Damien watched from across the room as Nina, her roommate, wrapped her in a hug. He wanted to go to her, to hold her, to share in her joy, but he knew he had forfeited that right. Instead, he left quietly, content in the knowledge that Robert Sterling would live and Victoria would never have to know the source of her salvation. Over the following weeks, Damien threw himself into a different kind of work. He established the Sterling Foundation, named after Victoria's father, dedicated to providing medical assistance to families who couldn't afford life-saving treatments. He visited hospitals, met with patients, and learned about a world he had never bothered to see before. For the first time in his life, Damien Cross was using his wealth for something other than making more wealth. Meanwhile, Victoria had returned to work at Meridian Gallery Cafe, but everything felt different. Her father was recovering beautifully. The mysterious donation had lifted the crushing weight of debt from her shoulders, and she was finally free to think about her own future. She had enrolled in art therapy courses and was working toward her degree in art education, dreams she had put aside to care for her father. But despite all the good things happening in her life, Victoria felt hollow. She told herself it was exhaustion from months of stress, but Nina wasn't buying it. "You miss him," Nina said one evening as they sat in their apartment eating takeout Chinese food. "I don't know what you're talking about," Victoria replied, not looking up from her. "Lo Mein, the billionaire Damien? You miss him? I hate him. You can hate someone and miss them at the same time. Called complicated feelings. Victoria finally looked up. He bought me Nina. Like I was something he could own. It was all. Because of some sick bet with his friend? But you said he gave you the money anyway, even after you left. That doesn't make it better, doesn't it? Nina set down her chopsticks. Look, I'm not defending what he did. It was wrong and gross and completely unacceptable. But people can change, Vic. Maybe he realized he made a mistake. People like Damian Cross don't change. People like Damian Cross don't usually give away millions of dollars for nothing either. But someone paid for your dad's surgery? Victoria had wondered about the anonymous donation, but she had been too grateful to question it. The timing had been miraculous, coming just when they needed it most. You think it was him? Victoria asked. I think you should find out. 2 days later, Victoria found herself standing outside the Cross Technologies building, her heart pounding, as she stared up at the gleaming tower of glass and steel. She had told herself she was coming to confront him, to demand answers about the donation, and to tell him exactly what she thought of his attempts to buy forgiveness. But as she stood there, Victoria realized she was really there because Nina was right. She missed him. Not the cold, calculating man who had made her that terrible offer, but the broken, lonely person she had glimpsed that night in his penthouse. The man who had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt endless. Victoria's palms were sweating as she approached the reception desk, where an elegant woman with silver hair greeted her with a warm smile. You must be Victoria, Alina said. I'm Alina, Mr. Cross's assistant. He's been expecting you. He has. For weeks. Go on in. Victoria walked through the double doors into Damian's office and stopped short. The man sitting behind the massive desk looked like a shadow of the confident billionaire she remembered. He was thinner, paler, and there were dark circles under his blue eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless regret. Victoria, he said, standing up slowly. You came. I came to ask you about the donation, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. For my father's surgery, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. Damian walked around his desk, but stopped a careful distance away from her. Okay, yes, it was me. Couldn't let your father die because of my selfishness. So you thought you could buy your way back into my good graces? No, Damian said firmly. I did it because I love you, and I love you enough to want you to be happy, even if it has nothing to do with me. Your father is alive, and you're free to live your life without debt crushing you. That's all that matters. Victoria stared at him, searching his face for any sign of manipulation or calculation, but all she saw was exhaustion and genuine emotion. Tell me about the bet, she said. Damian closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Then he told her everything. The poker game, James Morrison's challenge, the stupid wager that had started it all. He told her how he had forgotten about it until that night, how the realization had made him sick with self-loathing. I know it doesn't excuse what I did, he said when he finished. Nothing excuses it. But I need you to know that what happened between us had nothing to do with that bet. What I felt for you, what I still feel for you, that was real. How do I know you're telling the truth? Because I destroyed James Morrison. Completely. His business, his reputation, his future. I made sure he'll never hurt anyone the way he hurt you. Damian's voice grew quiet. And because I've spent the last month learning how to be the kind of man who deserves to love someone like you. Victoria felt her anger wavering. What do you mean? Damian gestured to a wall covered with photos and newspaper clippings. Victoria walked closer and saw images of hospitals, families, children receiving treatment they couldn't afford, all funded by the Sterling Foundation. I named it after your father, Damian said softly, because he taught me something about love through you, about what it means to sacrifice for someone else without expecting anything in return. Victoria touched one of the photos, a little girl with cancer receiving her first treatment. How many families? 47 so far. We're expanding to include housing assistance and job training for caregivers. This is what you've been doing? Is what I should have been doing all along? Damian stepped closer. Victoria, I know I can't undo what I did. I know I can't take back the way we met, or the reasons why. But I'm not the same man I was. That night, Victoria turned to face him, and for the first time in weeks, she really looked at him. She saw the changes Nina had talked about. The way he held himself differently, less arrogant and more humble. The way his eyes had lost their cold calculation and gained something warmer. I was so angry, she whispered. You had every right to be. I felt like such a fool. You're not a fool. You're the strongest, most incredible woman I've ever met. Victoria felt tears starting to form. I missed you too. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. I don't know how we move forward from this, Victoria said. I don't know how to trust you again. We take it slow, Damien said. We start over. Let me court you properly this time. Let me show you who I really am when I'm not hiding behind money and power. No contracts this time? No contracts, no money, no games. It's just me, hoping against hope that someday you might forgive me enough to let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Victoria looked into his eyes and saw her own hope reflected. Back at her, it would take time to rebuild trust. It would take work to heal the wounds between them. But standing there in that office, surrounded by evidence of the good he was trying to do, Victoria realized that some stories deserved second chances. Okay, she said softly. Okay, we can try. But we're starting from the beginning. It's no shortcuts, no rushing, no assumptions about where this goes. Damien's face lit up with the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Can I take you to dinner? Somewhere modest? Somewhere we can just talk? Victoria smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. I know a place. It's a little jazz club downtown. My father used to play there. I'd love that. As they walked out of the office together, Elena looked up from her desk and smiled. Sometimes she thought the best love stories were the ones that started with the worst beginnings. Sometimes the people who had the furthest to fall were the ones capable of rising the highest. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the same jazz club where her father had once played, watching Robert Sterling perform again for the first time. Since his surgery, the room was packed with friends, family, and patients from the Sterling Foundation. Damien sat beside her, his hand warm in hers. No longer the cold billionaire, but simply the man who had learned to love without conditions. Thank you, Victoria whispered to him, as her father played a beautiful rendition of The Way You Look Tonight. For what? Damien asked. For becoming the man I fell in love with. Damien squeezed her hand and leaned down to kiss her temple. Thank you for teaching me how. As the music swirled around them, and the people they had helped celebrated life and second chances, Victoria realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories were the ones that began with impossible choices, and grew into something neither money nor contracts could ever capture. Some things she had learned truly were priceless.